Hey everyone, welcome back to Paranormal Asia. Tonight's story is true, whispered in crowded apartment blocks across the region. It's about one unit no tenant could ever keep. Families moved in, filled it with life, then left quickly, shaken. The rent was low, but the price was hidden elsewhere. Howard and Celia thought they could outlast the curse. With them lived their teenage son and their quiet helper Lonnie. Before I go further, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Some apartments notice the hour you enter and the hour you never leave. Across Asia, there's a belief in stigmatized homes, flats marked by tragedy. Whether someone died inside or even next door, the space is never truly free. Rent drops sharply, tempting the desperate. Outsiders laugh at superstition, but locals know walls absorb last breaths, and sometimes they exhale them back at night. This apartment wasn't listed as haunted, yet its reputation clung like smoke. Neighbors avoided speaking its number. Rent was nearly one-third lower than anywhere nearby. Bargains in housing markets are rare, but everyone knows if the price is too good, there's usually a reason. Some reasons can't be explained by paperwork. Howard was practical, counting every coin, convinced ghosts existed only in stories. Celia wanted stability for their son, and Lonnie, loyal and soft-spoken, followed wherever they moved. They told themselves whispers were exaggeration. Still, they signed the lease in silence, as if they already suspected the apartment had been waiting. The flat looked normal: narrow balcony, cracked tiles, beige walls, but silence pressed unnaturally thick. The lift paused on their floor more often than any other, doors sighing open to emptiness. Even on move-in day, the building seemed to lean closer, curious which part of the family would break first. Locals told stories of those before: a family packed overnight, abandoning furniture; a student who left textbooks behind; another couple who refused to explain why they ended their lease early. Would you have moved in knowing tenants never lasted long, or would a discounted rent tempt you to take the risk? Soalia remembered her grandmother's warning: never sleep beside a wall that had heard arguments. But superstition feels fragile beside necessity. She unpacked photos, listening to ceilings creak at hours that never matched neighbors' footsteps. Some places sound alive even when empty, like they're practicing the noises people once made inside them. Lonnie noticed first. Laundry on the balcony dripped longer, as though unseen hands had held the cloth. Water in the kettle sang strangely. She crossed herself quietly, never speaking of it. Helpers in Asia learn early: fear inside another's house is carried alone. You protect the family first, yourself second. Their son mocked the idea of curses. 16, restless, he stayed up with headphones glowing blue, lost in online games, but even he admitted the internet cut strangely, always around the same hour past midnight. He shrugged it off, yet shadows sometimes flickered across his screen where no light should fall. Delivery men rarely climbed to their floor. Packages were left at the lobby with excuses. One muttered a warning under his breath: don't open doors after dark. The building caretaker never met Celia's eyes when she asked simple questions. Everyone seemed to know something, but no one dared to explain. Across Asia, protections are common: mirrors turned outward to confuse spirits, salt scattered along thresholds, red paper charms pasted to doors. Even families who laugh at ghosts still follow traditions quietly, just in case. But this family moved in bare. They gave the apartment no barriers, and it noticed. At first, Howard and Celia joked about saving money, but humor only goes so far. Everyone knows a flat that seems too easy to rent usually carries a debt. And debts like this aren't paid in currency. They're collected in whispers, in sleep, in nights you can't remember afterward. From their first week, the nights felt heavier. Neon from outside flickered but never fully lit the rooms. Pipes clicked when untouched. The lift exhaled with no one inside. Each sound explainable, yes, but harmless details collect, and once they collect, they begin shaping themselves into stories you can't escape. So the family settled, believing they'd succeed where others failed. They hung curtains, arranged furniture, filled shelves with books, but an apartment keeps its own records, and this one had already decided. Tenants never stayed long, because some places don't want residents, they want witnesses. Witnesses rarely survive past the beginning. The first night seemed quiet enough. The family fell into routine: Celia cooking late, Howard leaving early, Lonnie cleaning, their son glued to glowing screens. But the apartment carried its own rhythm. Ceilings groaned as if someone walked directly above, though their unit was top floor. Faucets rattled as though pressure shifted, harmless if considered one by one. Yet together they felt choreographed, like the building itself was reminding them they weren't alone. It started with the lift, always pausing at their floor, sighing open, even at 3 in the morning. No footsteps followed, no voices drifted down the hall, only silence heavier than before. Lonnie swore she heard breathing when it happened, faint and shallow, like someone standing just beyond the gate. Celia dismissed it, old machinery, thin walls. But one dawn, when she stepped into the corridor to throw trash, she saw the ash of burned incense along the stairwell corner. Not hers. Not the neighbors either, she later discovered. Someone had performed a ritual quietly, without explanation, in a place meant to stay sterile. The teenage son noticed too. His screen flickered with static bursts each night, precise to the same minute past midnight. He laughed it off until one frame froze, showing the hallway camera feed, though he had no such software installed. And there, behind the gate, was a figure blurred and pale. Would you still tell yourself it's all explainable, or would you begin counting the hours until morning, hoping nothing pressed closer? Howard believed routine solved everything. Bills, ledgers, chores, all manageable. He told Celia she worried too much. But routine cracked the night he woke at 2 to find his wife sitting upright in bed, staring at the shared wall. She whispered she'd heard furniture scraping, voices muffled like arguments repeating. Howard pressed his ear against plaster. Nothing. No sound at all. Only the thick quiet of a sealed room. He smiled, reassured, until the headboard vibrated sharply once, like a knock from inside the wall itself. His smile collapsed. He didn't mention it the next morning, but Celia noticed his silence. Meanwhile, Lonnie kept her own secrets. Hanging laundry on the balcony, she sometimes saw curtains twitch in the unit opposite, the one supposedly empty. She waved once, out of habit. The curtain froze mid-sway, held too long, like someone gripping it from inside. She stopped waving after that. The boy grew restless. He swore his charger cord coiled differently each morning, though he'd left it flat. His alarm reset itself an hour back, making him late for class twice. He joked that maybe the apartment wanted him to fail. Celia laughed weakly, but inside she felt her stomach knot tighter. On the 7th night, they found the blinds half open. No one admitted touching them. Not Howard, not Celia, not Lonnie. Their son hadn't left his room. The slit revealed the opposite window, dark but watching, and the family understood. Some apartments don't need introductions. They already know your habits, and they wait. Days turned ordinary, but nights claimed the difference. Around midnight, the air thickened, as though humidity rose indoors. The boy sometimes coughed in his sleep, unable to breathe deeply. Celia checked the air conditioner, filters clean, vents clear. Still, each night grew harder, as if the flat disliked lungs working. Howard's rationality faltered when he found footprints on the bathroom tiles. Wet, bare, too small for his son, too wide for Celia. He asked Lonnie. She swore she hadn't entered since cleaning earlier. The prints faded as he stared, vanishing grain by grain, until the tiles looked untouched. He spoke nothing. Lonnie prayed quietly in her room, whispering to saints from her childhood. She left a glass of water by her door each night. By dawn it was always lower, though no one drank it. Once she tasted it, curious. It was faintly salty, as if ocean water touched her lips. Celia felt watched constantly. Mirrors in the flat seemed to stretch her reflection, her shoulders drooping lower than her own body. Once, brushing her hair, she saw Howard standing behind her, clear in the mirror, though he was asleep in bed. She shut off the lights, heart hammering, refusing to look again. They spoke less as a family. Meals were quieter. The boy ate faster, headphones always nearby. Howard checked doors twice before leaving for work. Celia avoided eye contact with neighbors. Even silence carries weight in apartments with history, and this silence had begun choosing which parts of the family to lean against. The hallway outside their flat grew stranger. Neighbors passed without meeting their eyes. One morning Celia opened the door to find 3 grains of rice scattered precisely across the threshold. She swept them away, unsettled, but the next morning they were there again, positioned exactly the same. Who placed them? Lonnie grew nervous with chores. Laundry dried slower, carrying a sweet, rotten smell, like fruit left too long in the sun. She whispered to Celia once that someone stood across the balcony at night, watching. Celia shook her head, refusing belief, but locked the door tighter after sunset. The boy began waking disoriented. He swore someone had whispered his name near his bed, breath warm, though the windows were closed. He set his phone to record overnight. In the morning, scrolling back, he found static bursts, and beneath one, a woman's faint laughter stretched too long, cracking midway, unnatural. Howard stayed stubborn. He insisted nothing unusual was happening. Yet one night, he startled awake to the sound of cutlery clinking softly in the kitchen. He rose, found every drawer shut, counters clean. Still the faint echo of metal on porcelain lingered. He returned to bed, face pale, saying nothing. In many Asian beliefs, spirits bleed through walls, carrying grief where boundaries are thin. Tenants may come and go, but memory does not. And the apartment seemed intent on rehearsing the same scenes: arguments, laughter, footsteps, curtains moving, as if inviting the family to join its unfinished performance. By the second week, Cecilia began dreading evenings. Daylight kept the flat almost normal, but at night its air turned restless. Shadows pooled in corners thicker than they should. The family stayed together in the living room longer, as though no one wanted to be the last awake. One night she stepped quietly into the hallway for water. The blinds shifted open on their own, inch by inch. She froze. From the gap, pale fingers curled against the fabric, tugging slowly. No face, no body, only a hand thin as paper, nails sharp. She stumbled backward, heart hammering. The blinds closed again as though nothing had moved. She locked herself in her room, refusing to tell Howard, knowing he'd dismiss it. But in her chest she carried the truth. The apartment wasn't just haunted by sound. Something had already learned how to reach inside. Lonnie experienced her own terror days later. Returning from errands, she opened the door to find all the family's shoes neatly lined but reversed, toes pointing inward toward the flat. She knew no one had time to rearrange them. To her culture, that meant an invitation. Feet turned inside so spirits could enter. Their son stopped recording his sleep. He wouldn't explain why. Celia found his phone face down, screen cracked, microphone disabled. He muttered only once, "It doesn't want me listening anymore." After that, silence grew thicker, and the family began to realize tenants here didn't just move out, they were moved out. Celia told herself the hand she saw at the blinds was a dream, a trick of exhaustion. But deep down, denial grew thinner each night. The apartment didn't feel empty anymore, it felt occupied. She avoided walking alone after midnight, as if the hall itself listened for footsteps. The strange events grew bolder. Lonnie swore she heard chairs dragging across the floor when no one was home. Howard brushed it aside until he came home one evening to find the dining table shifted several inches, chairs slightly turned as if unseen guests had risen mid-meal. Their son withdrew further. He rarely joked anymore. His headphones stayed around his neck, but silence leaked from him instead of laughter. Once Celia entered his room and found him staring at the wall, lips moving soundlessly. When she touched his shoulder, he snapped out of it, startled, claiming he remembered nothing. The hallway remained the most unsettling. Every morning at dawn, Celia found incense ash near the threshold. She swept it away, and every morning it returned. Whoever left it did so without being seen. The caretaker denied it. Neighbors denied it. Yet someone, or something, was maintaining a ritual meant to contain what lived inside. You've heard of places that reject people, haven't you? Apartments where tenants feel more like visitors, where walls close in as if reminding you that you don't belong. That was the truth seeping in now. The family wasn't simply renting this flat. They were intruding in someone else's unfinished home. The first true confrontation came with Lonnie. One late afternoon, she was ironing clothes when the power flickered. Lights dimmed, fan blades slowed, but only in her room. She stepped out. Every other light in the flat burned steady. Returning, she found the iron cold and unplugged, though she swore she hadn't touched it. That night she woke to the faint sound of water dripping. She followed it to the kitchen sink. A glass she had left filled earlier was now overflowing. Water poured steadily, though the tap was dry. She lifted the glass. It was hot, steaming, as though freshly boiled. Celia's unease escalated. Mirrors continued to betray her. One evening, brushing her hair, she saw Howard's reflection smile, though his face in reality was neutral, half asleep. She dropped the brush. The reflection's lips kept moving, whispering words she couldn't hear. She shut off the light and refused to look again. Howard began avoiding the flat. He lingered at work, stayed later with colleagues, anything to delay returning. But even his denial cracked when he woke one dawn to find every drawer in the bedroom pulled open, clothing spilling like tongues. He slammed them shut, but the echo of scraping wood carried long after. The boy whispered in his sleep, words neither English nor his native tongue. Sometimes laughter escaped instead, high-pitched and too long. When Celia tried to shake him awake, his eyes opened wide but unfocused, staring straight through her. For a moment she thought he wasn't her son at all. By the third week, the family's sleep had collapsed into fragments. They ate in silence, voices subdued, glancing at corners like people living under constant watch. The apartment grew louder, almost mocking their exhaustion. Knocks traveled through walls, sometimes a single thud, other times a rapid series as if impatient. Celia couldn't ignore the balcony anymore. Curtains moved when the windows were sealed. Shadows crossed the glass, though no one stood outside. Once she saw a silhouette of a woman, hair loose, head tilted, standing just beyond the railing. She blinked, and the balcony was empty. Still, her pulse raced. Lonnie confessed one morning she no longer trusted herself. Twice she'd woken standing in the corridor, barefoot, key in hand, ready to unlock the front gate. She swore she never remembered leaving her bed. Celia grew terrified of sleepwalking too, locking her door at night though it made her feel cruel. The boy grew pale. He stopped eating properly, spoon dangling forgotten, eyes always flicking to the shared wall of the empty unit. He told Celia quietly that someone whispered to him from that direction, a woman's voice, patient, telling him to look closer. He refused to repeat the rest. Howard still clung to denial, but even he jumped when the lift arrived at their floor at 3:11 a.m., doors opening with no one inside, a gust of air spilling out warm, carrying the faint smell of sweet rot. Would you have stepped inside to check, or locked your own door tighter? The next escalation came without warning. Celia was in the kitchen preparing rice when the light flickered. She froze, knife in hand. Slowly she realized the sound of boiling water had begun, though no pot sat on the stove. She turned and saw steam rising from the empty sink basin. Behind her, the blinds rustled. She turned again. The fabric shifted aside an inch, then another. Through the narrow gap she glimpsed pale skin pressed against glass. Not a face, not even a hand this time. Just a single eye staring through, unblinking, until the fabric swung back closed. She dropped the knife. It clattered, metal against tile, startling the boy who rushed in. What happened? He asked, but Celia only shook her head, knowing he already knew. His eyes darted toward the blinds, afraid of seeing what she had just witnessed. He refused to speak the truth aloud. Lonnie found the family's shoes rearranged again that same night, each one facing inward, as if prepared for someone else's entry. She sprinkled salt across the threshold, whispering in her native tongue. Howard scolded her for superstition, yet he didn't move the salt. He stepped over it each morning in silence. By now, every member of the family had seen or heard something. Only Howard still argued for rationality. But rational explanations can't erase salt-tasting water, reflections that smile without you, or an eye pressed to the window from a flat that should be empty. Denial had started to fracture completely. The apartment was no longer quiet. It breathed. Air pulsed strangely. Drafts moving through sealed windows. Ceilings creaked without weight. Lonnie heard whispers even with headphones stuffed in her ears. The boy refused to sleep alone, dragging his pillow to the living room. Celia let him, too drained to argue. One evening she returned home before sunset. The hallway smelled sharp, metallic, like iron left wet. She unlocked the gate and stopped. Every photo frame on the walls lay face down, not broken, not fallen, but carefully placed, as though someone had methodically silenced each smiling face in the house. Her hands shook as she lifted one. Behind the glass, condensation had formed, blurring the photo inside. She wiped it away. The blurred streak left behind almost resembled a handprint. She set it back down, too frightened to tell Howard. Some secrets you keep because no one will believe you. That night she awoke to find the boy standing at the foot of her bed. His eyes were open but empty. His lips parted slowly. "She's here," he whispered, voice flat. Then he collapsed, unconscious, onto the floor. Howard rushed in, furious, but his anger faltered when he saw marks on the boy's ankles, red lines like hands gripping too tightly. Some apartments push tenants away with unease. Others pull them inward, step by step, until they can't leave. This one had begun its pulling, and no one, not Celia, not Howard, not Lonnie, knew how to resist anymore. After the night their son collapsed at the foot of their bed, Celia no longer tried to deny the truth. She moved him back to his room, tucked in blankets, but could not stop staring at the faint bruises around his ankles. They looked like fingerprints, yet no human hand had touched him. The next morning Howard finally snapped. He stormed through the flat, flinging open curtains, searching every room as though proof of trespassers would fix everything. He found nothing, only the blinds, trembling faintly even with the windows closed. He slammed them shut, but the sound echoed like laughter pressed through the wall. That evening the apartment grew louder. Knocks on the wall turned into pounding, rhythmic like fists demanding entry. Lonnie cowered in her room, rosary clenched, whispering prayers. Celia clutched her son close, listening to furniture drag in the empty flat next door. The noises were no longer fleeting. They lasted minutes, deliberate. At midnight, the lift arrived at their floor again. The doors opened, and this time a gust of air rushed inside, cold enough to extinguish a candle Celia had left burning. She swore she heard footsteps cross the hall, moving toward their unit. Then the gate rattled, metal shaking as though gripped from the outside. Would you have dared open it to check? Or would you, like them, sit frozen in the dark, waiting for the sound to fade, heart pounding with each clatter of the steel bars? The next night, Howard admitted he could no longer explain away the events. His denial had cracked when he woke to see Celia sitting rigidly in bed, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing without sound. He shook her, but she did not respond. She only turned her head slowly toward the wall. Then, with a sudden gasp, she collapsed onto his chest. Trembling, "She wants in," Celia whispered. Her voice was her own, but hollow, stretched too thin. Howard tried to hold her, but she pulled away, staring into the corner of the room as though someone else stood there. Lonnie, too, felt the change. Sleepwalking grew worse. Twice she awoke on the balcony, barefoot, staring into the flat opposite. Once she even climbed onto the railing before collapsing back into herself, screaming. She swore she felt hands pressing against her back, urging her to cross over. The boy's condition darkened. He muttered to unseen presences, whispering words in a language none of them recognized. When Celia tried to stop him, he shoved her away with a strength that startled them all. Later he had no memory, only a drained look in his eyes, as if hours had been stolen. Everywhere, the apartment grew more alive. Lights flickered even in daylight. Reflections in windows moved differently than their owners. Shoes continued to turn inward. Salt lines vanished overnight. The family no longer doubted. The question now wasn't if the flat was haunted. It was how much longer they could resist becoming part of it. On the fourth week, the haunting erupted. It began in the kitchen, where the sound of boiling returned, louder, sharper, until steam filled the air and the smoke alarm screamed. But when Howard and Celia rushed in, every burner was cold. The steam rose from the sink drain itself, hissing like a voice. Then came the laughter, not faint this time, but clear, high-pitched, cracked, echoing from inside the shared wall. Lonnie covered her ears and wept. The boy gripped his head, rocking back and forth, whispering, "She's here, she's here." Celia dragged him into her arms, but the laughter only grew. Suddenly, the blinds in the living room shot open. The opposite window revealed a shape, womanly, long hair hanging, face obscured by shadow. She raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. Celia screamed, pulling the curtains closed. But when she opened her eyes, the figure was already inside. She stood in the corner, pale as ash, eyes bottomless, dress torn like something pulled from water. She didn't move at first, only stared. Then her lips stretched in a smile too wide, too sharp. The air turned freezing. The boy's breath fogged as he whispered again, "She's here." Howard lunged to protect his family, but his legs buckled, and he collapsed as though the strength had been stolen from him. The figure took a step forward, floorboards creaking. In that moment, the family realized they were no longer witnesses, they were participants in her unfinished story. The figure didn't vanish. She remained silent but watchful, as if feeding on their fear. Celia clutched her son, Lanny, gripping the rosary so tightly the beads cut into her palm. Howard forced himself upright, shouting that they should leave, but when he pulled the door, it refused to open. The gate was locked, the padlock somehow clasped shut from the outside. Howard rattled it desperately, sweat slicking his hands. The woman's head tilted, curtains fluttered though no wind blew. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, every talisman Lanny had taped above the threshold peeled off at once, drifting to the floor. The apartment seemed to breathe. Lights flickered violently. The figure blurred, then reappeared closer, standing only steps away. Her hair lifted slightly as though under water. She raised her arm and pointed, not at Howard, not at Lanny, but directly at the boy. His body stiffened, eyes rolling white, mouth opening to scream, but no sound came out. His scream was trapped, strangled. Celia clawed at him, shaking him, tears streaking her face. Lanny rushed forward, chanting in her native tongue, splashing the last of her blessed water toward the apparition. For a moment the figure recoiled, hissing, but then she laughed, voice jagged, and stepped forward again. Howard's rationality shattered completely. He begged the others to run, but the door stayed sealed, the gate refusing to budge. They were trapped inside, and the apartment had already decided whose life it wanted to claim first. It ended with a violent climax. The figure lunged, crossing the room with unnatural speed. Howard threw himself forward, intercepting her path. He collapsed instantly, gasping as though struck by invisible force. Celia screamed, dragging her son toward the corner. Lonnie stood frozen, rosary dangling, eyes wide with terror. The woman loomed over Howard, his body convulsed, chest heaving. His hands clawed at his throat as if unseen fingers wrapped tight. His face flushed purple. Celia shrieked, grabbing a fallen talisman and pressing it against his chest. For a split second, the air shifted. Howard coughed, the grip loosening. The figure shrieked, sound rattling the walls, glass shattering in the kitchen. Lights burst overhead, plunging the flat into darkness lit only by the flicker of neon outside. In the strobing light, Celia saw the woman's face clearly for the first time, eyes hollow, mouth torn wider than human, dripping shadows. Then just as suddenly, the figure dissolved into smoke, vanishing back into the wall. Silence crashed down, heavy and suffocating. Howard gasped on the floor, alive but broken. Celia clutched her son tightly, sobbing. Lonnie collapsed to her knees, whispering thanks to anyone listening. But the quiet was not relief, it was warning, because every family before had reached this same breaking point, and every family before had still left, forced out, marked forever. The apartment didn't lose, it only waited. And now, this family understood why tenants never lasted long. For 3 days, the apartment lay in silence. The family barely spoke. Howard's breathing remained shallow, his voice ragged, bruises around his throat proof of what they had all seen. Celia stayed awake beside him, refusing to close her eyes. The boy avoided mirrors entirely, keeping his curtains drawn tight. Lonnie insisted on scattering salt daily. She whispered to spirits in her native tongue, but her prayers felt weaker now. Once when she poured salt across the threshold, the grain scattered upward, as though lifted by unseen breath. She screamed, clutching her rosary, begging Celia to leave at once. But leaving was not simple. The lease bound them, finances shackled them, and Howard, proud even in his shaken state, refused to abandon what he had called just walls. He muttered about hospitals and stress, claiming the mind could invent horrors. Yet his hands trembled each time the lift stopped on their floor. The apartment seemed to wait. No pounding, no screams, only a stillness heavier than ever before. They all felt it, the pause before the next move, as though the figure had not been defeated, only patient, biding time until their guard dropped. Would you have left everything behind, possessions, savings, even pride, if it meant surviving? Or would you, like them, gamble one more night, hoping the silence meant safety? That was their mistake. They believed quiet was mercy. They did not realize it was preparation. The tragedy began with the boy. One dawn, Celia found his room empty, the curtains fluttering despite sealed windows. She screamed for Howard and Lonnie. They searched frantically, doors flung open, closets yanked wide, nothing. Then Celia noticed the balcony door, unlocked, wide, shoes still by the rack, curtains swaying. She rushed forward, but Howard pulled her back. Together they stepped onto the balcony. No one stood there. Below, the city moved as usual, vendors setting up, traffic flowing, yet in the air lingered the faint smell of orange peel, sweet and rotten. The boy was gone, vanished as though erased. Neighbors later swore they hadn't seen a thing. No body below, no screams. It was as if he had been lifted directly into the opposite flat. Celia collapsed in grief, sobbing until her throat tore. Howard shook with rage, pounding the gate. Lonnie fainted, rosary still clutched tight. The police arrived, searched, filed reports. They asked questions about doors, windows, habits. They measured distances. None of it mattered. The boy had not fallen. He had been taken. The officers looked uneasy, avoiding eye contact, murmuring among themselves about bad units. They did not linger. By dusk they left. Celia sat alone that night, staring at the blinds. She whispered her son's name again and again, hoping he would answer. Once she swore she heard his voice from the opposite unit calling faintly. "Look closer," she screamed, but no one came. The apartment had claimed another tenant. Howard finally broke. He demanded they leave, dragging suitcases into the hall, urging Celia and Lonnie to follow. But when he pushed the lift button, nothing happened. The doors remained shut, panel dead. They ran for the stairwell, but the exit door at ground level was chained, padlocked from the outside. They banged, screamed, begged. No answer. The caretaker stood outside, watching silently, refusing to help. His eyes looked hollow, as if he had seen this before. He turned, walked away, leaving them trapped inside the building. The family realized the apartment was not theirs anymore. It was the apartment's. That night, Howard sat at the table, head in his hands. He whispered apologies to Celia, promises he couldn't keep. Celia clutched his hand, tears staining the laminate. Lonnie stayed in her room, praying until her voice gave out. Shadows lengthened across the walls, stretching unnaturally as if listening. At midnight, the blinds twitched open again. This time no hand pulled them. They opened wide, fully, exposing the opposite unit, and there, clearly visible, was the boy. Standing in the dark, eyes empty, body still. He lifted a hand slowly, beckoning them forward. Celia screamed. Howard collapsed to his knees. The figure of the woman stepped behind the boy, pale hands resting on his shoulders. Her smile stretched impossibly wide. Celia clawed at the curtains, tearing them down, but the image lingered, etched into the window like a stain. Some tenants are not only lost, they are recruited. By morning, Celia's sanity had shattered. She sat cross-legged in the living room, whispering lullabies to no one. Her eyes stayed fixed on the opposite window, waiting for her son to appear again. Howard tried to pull her away, but she screamed, thrashing, insisting he was still calling her name. Lonnie begged Howard to flee, to abandon everything, but Howard only stared at the threshold, at the padlock on the gate. He knew it didn't matter. No matter where they went, the apartment would not let them leave clean. It marked them. It carried them like unfinished debts. That night the laughter returned, rolling jagged, filling every wall. Plates shattered in the kitchen. Light bulbs popped, raining sparks. Howard covered his ears and fell to the floor. Celia crawled toward the balcony, arms outstretched, whispering her son's name. Lonnie pulled her back, sobbing. The apartment shook as if in triumph. When silence fell, Celia was gone. One blink she writhed in Lonnie's grip, the next she vanished, leaving only the smell of damp hair and iron. Lonnie collapsed, screaming. Howard sat frozen, hollow, eyes glazed. He had lost both wife and son, taken by walls that refused to forgive. Neighbors found them the next day, Howard unresponsive, Lonnie trembling, babbling prayers. The police closed the case as missing persons. The unit went dark again, blinds shut, lease terminated. Yet locals knew. They whispered. The apartment had simply added 2 more names to its record. In many Asian traditions, it is believed that grief bleeds into walls, that spirits linger where deaths are sudden, violent, or unresolved. Apartments like these are called by many names: ominous flats, unlucky rooms, hungry residences. Each culture recognizes the same truth. Some places remember too much, and memory becomes possession. A property marked this way rarely heals. Even if no death occurs inside, proximity is enough. Energy crosses walls, seeps through pipes, clings to furniture. Families may rotate in and out, but the apartment remains unchanged. Tenants are simply entries in its ledger, temporary witnesses before silence claims them. Howard never recovered. He was taken away quietly, admitted to a facility where his eyes still wander corners, whispering of blinds moving when no one touches them. Lonnie returned to her homeland, forever marked, refusing to speak of what she endured. The boy and Celia were never found. Today the apartment sits empty again. Rent remains low. Flyers advertise quiet neighbors, convenient location, but locals still walk faster when they pass its door. No one meets the caretaker's gaze. Everyone knows the pattern. No one says it aloud. Tenants never last long, not because they leave, but because they are chosen. The family believed they could outlast superstition, but some places aren't meant for the living. Apartments like this don't forget, and they don't forgive. They wait, tenant after tenant. They choose who to keep and who to let vanish without a trace. These haunted flats exist all across Asia, whispered about in hushed tones, rented cheaply but never cheaply escaped. Some say it's grief that lingers, others swear it's spirits that refuse to move on. But the truth is simpler and more terrifying. Once you step inside, you're no longer a tenant. You're part of the apartment's memory. So I'll leave you with this. Would you risk a cheaper rent if it meant sleeping beside walls that breathe? Would you step inside knowing families vanish without a trace? Tell me, would you dare stay a single night in an apartment where tenants never last long? Check your own walls tonight, just to be sure they're still empty. If you hear the blinds move after this video ends, don't look too closely. Make sure your shoes are facing outward, otherwise you might be inviting someone in.